Today's topic of our webinar is diplomacy and information gathering in the post-Snowden era, and we will basically tackle the question of information gathering on the internet, and in the first part, and in the second part, the question of the impact of the Snowden revelation on diplomacy and information gathering. First, instead of providing general introduction, I would like to focus on one concrete example. This is the latest Iran nuclear negotiation which happened in Geneva last weekend, when main protagonists, mainly United States and Iran, concluded so-called Iran nuke deal. And I'm sure that you follow this news closely. It is the major development in the, I would say, global policy, but definitely diplomatic seismic shift in the Middle East. Iran is back. It will be gradually, it's clear, integrated in international community, including lifting of sanctions and rebuilding links between Iran and the rest of the world. Now, what was extremely interesting was the way how the negotiation was conducted. First of all, there was a secret negotiation in the preparation for the Geneva final negotiation last weekend, and secret negotiation was conducted in Oman between Iran and the United States, and it basically paved the way for the deal. Later on, European Union joined, Russia and China. But what is extremely interesting is that even in the internet era, where there are great hopes of completely transparent and open diplomacy, there is a need for secret diplomacy. And you will hear some of the reasoning why the question of secrecy is still relevant, or translucency, that understanding something is happening. But for us, Iran nuke negotiations are extremely important because of the use of social media. Obviously, we, in general, we expected the high presence of the many tweets, blogs, and social media coverage. And where we analyzed what were the main sources of information for diplomats, let us assume Italian diplomats who is following these negotiations in Geneva. Italy is not in the conference room. Well, it's part of the European Union setup. And what are the possibilities for the Italian diplomat to gather good information and send back to Venezuela? Obviously, we have press conferences for general public, and they were conducted, I would say, relatively frequently because of the high interest of general public for the negotiations. There were diplomatic briefings, famous EU coordinations, and I'm sure that EAS, who was in the driving seat, was updating the member states about development and providing slightly more information that was gathered through the press conference. And we had social media, mainly tweets. There were blogs and other tools, but tweets were quite frequent, and we are starting a study on coverage of Geneva negotiation by tweets and in generally social media. And the preliminary finding for diplomacy is that there were three types of tweets. There were extremely important tweets, and probably the most important was a tweet by Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs Zarif at 3 o'clock in the morning, or Saturday morning, announcing we have reached an agreement. And it was interesting that it was sent via tweet even before the press conference that they had later on. Those are highly important tweets that they are coming from official source, and they are announcing important breakthrough. Then there are the tweets which are probably the most interesting for the diplomatic profession, and we label them signaling tweets. As you know, in diplomacy, sending the signals and testing the ground, especially during the negotiation, in parallel to negotiation, is extremely important. And there were tweets, it's clear, that were sent by NGOs, journalists, general public, that could be some sort of testing tweets for different ideas during the negotiation. And those tweets are the most relevant for diplomats, especially for junior diplomats, because through that you can see the dynamics, parallel dynamic from dynamics that you had in the room. And at the end, you have then other tweets, and I would say 95% of the tweets were other tweets with as trivia, conspiracy theories, and you name it and you have it. Now, what is important is to stress that negotiating parties were very careful about publicity of negotiation. Negotiation was conducted inside the room. There were no tweets from the conference room. And I think they also carefully managed this interplay between formal and informal. Members of the delegations are quite discreet when it comes to tweeting. Therefore, it is an interesting finding that if you really need to reach the deal, to have a compromise reached, sometimes you have to filter access by public to the conference room. And last three major breakthroughs in the negotiation, which is last year Myanmar start of the integration in the international community. Earlier this year, the Kosovo agreement between Serbia and Kosovo under the auspices of the European Union, and now Iran nuclear deal, have in common exactly the careful management of the access of the public to the negotiating process. And they introduce some form that we can call it translucent diplomacy. It is not transparent. There are no details. There are no webcams in the conference room. People outside are aware that something is happening. Last week in Geneva, a few months ago in Brussels between Kosovo and Serbia, but there are no details about the negotiation. And it is important because as soon as you have a tweet, webcams in the conference room, the negotiators will start to basically sending messages to their public back home. And immediately after the Geneva deal was reached, Iranian and the US negotiators went back to their respective capitals and started basically convincing their public that they had victory in Geneva and that the deal, Geneva deal, is in the vital interest of Iran or United States. And this is respectable because sometimes it's much more difficult to send a deal back home and convince public back home than your own interlocutor on the other side of the table. Now, one important question for a diplomat and for you operating on a daily basis is how to distinguish useful from useless tweets. And again, the main challenge in the information age, how to find the information which is relevant for your particular needs. Now, I will leave this question for our discussion. Think about some sort of suggestions, ideas, and insights from your experience. Now, here are so-called 5 main competencies in e-diplomacy. We will reflect only on the first competence, which is to curate information. And it is related to this dilemma from the question that we just posed. The other 4 competencies, to communicate, to collaborate, to create information, to critique, are relevant, but we won't focus on them. I'm sure that you will discuss it either during some of the following session, or you will have it as a part of your training at the Istituto Diplomatico. What are the key building blocks of curating information? First is finding information through internet search, Wikipedia, Google Scholar, e-resources, image textbooks. Now, the question of finding information is not as critical as it was 1 century ago or 30, 40 years ago. Now it's much easier to find information. What is becoming much more challenging is to filter information and to collate or collect information which is relevant for your particular needs. I will bring one example from the director of Istituto Diplomatico, and I'm sure that you will have more time with Stefano Baldi discussing this aspect. Here is the NetVibes tool, a very simple tool and very powerful tool in doing this first curation of information by following so-called RSS feeds. And the application that you can see here at the screen is the NetVibes. The main function is to collect various thread information and to have some sort of information cockpit from which you can then navigate or follow up on the specific information. Now, while we are discussing information, we should be aware of a few important aspects of information gathering. One is a so-called bias, filter bias, and here is the link to the excellent TED talk that you can find in information gathering. When you search Google, when you search, when you're on Amazon or more or less all social media tools, especially for information gathering, information that you get are basically adjusted to your profile. All of us have profiles on the internet. Our habits, our way of searching information, what we are clicking on are collected. And this is one of the aspects of the recent NSA discussion. Their profiles, they are mainly related to commercial. So far we discovered through NSA that there are other uses of this profiling. And when you access the information, it is not neutral, objective information. It is information adjusted to your profile. Therefore, if you search for let's say, Iran, and if you're in diplomacy, you will get most likely information on diplomatic aspects, latest developments. If you have your friend who is interested in history of religion or philosophy, he will get something of Zoroastrian religion or something from as his top links. There are some commonality, but searches are adjusted. This is important because we sometimes tend to think that Google search or Facebook is completely objective. Here is one search bias with regard to North and South. Mainly you can find sources from the North, less from the South, on even information related to the problem, in this case on South Africa. Now, this was the first part on information gathering, summarizing basically Iranian nuclear negotiations, indicating different types of tweets, and then focusing on information bias. This is just the surface of the discussion on information gathering, and you can dig further into various aspects on search engines, Wikipedia, information that you can gather there. And I'm sure that at the Instituto Diplomatico we will discuss it. The second part of my presentation will focus on diplomatic information gathering in the post-Snowden or after Snowden era. And here, we will move from the technicalities to questions of the status of diplomats and diplomatic law regulating the information gathering in the past. Now, what are the sources of diplomatic information? According to Robert Hibbert, who wrote the book Intelligence and National Security, former British diplomat, back in 1990s, therefore this is a bit dated, 90% of public information, 90% of diplomatic information are basically public information. 50% pure public information from newspaper media, 10 to 20% confidential contacts with diplomats, which diplomats cultivate, and 20 to 25 leaks, indiscretion, and other unplanned sources of information. According to him, only 10% of information diplomats gather through covert and clandestine operation, which could be some sort of different name for spying, for example. Now, it is a bit dated, almost 25 years, and in the meantime we had internet, and I would say that this percentage moved towards a higher participation of public information in the overall pie of information that diplomats have to gather. I would say even close to 95%. Obviously, it depends from country to country. Smaller countries have to rely exclusively on public information. Now, why is Snowden revelation important for diplomacy? You know, there were different aspects. There was the prism, and now you need even mind map to have the clear idea what were the different aspects of the Snowden revelation. But there are three incidents that are directly related to diplomacy. The first one was surveillance of 38 embassies and permanent missions based in the United States, mainly in Washington and New York. Second one is surveillance of delegation attending the G20 meeting in London in 2009. And last one is use of embassies for surveillance of the capitals in Asia, use of the US, UK, Canada, Australia, embassies in Asia, particularly in Bangkok, Beijing, Jakarta, and Hanoi. Those are three concrete aspects related to the core diplomacy. One could discuss also the question on surveillance of the presidents or Prime Minister Angela Merkel or President Rousseff, but I would just focus on diplomats in this presentation. Now, as you know, Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations from 1961 is the core international legal instrument regulating the question of diplomatic privileges and immunities. It is one of the most solid international conventions because it is codification of customary law, practices and customs till 1961. Therefore, the rules were gradually shaped and fine-tuned for the last 4 or 5 centuries. And it is also observed by many states because of the reciprocity. In diplomacy, what goes around comes around very fast. Therefore, reciprocity forces states to observe Vienna Convention. And if there is any solid, rock-solid law in international law, it is definitely Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. As you know, other conventions could be more or less could be less followed and considered not, as somebody said, not worth it, even papers on which they are written. But it is not the case with this convention. What does Vienna Convention tell us about information gathering? First, Article 3D indicates that that diplomats are allowed to assert information by all lawful means, conditions, and development in the receiving state, and reporting thereon to the government of the sending state. The key is that they have to do it with all lawful means, and clandestine operations and spying are, according to this Article 3D, illegal. It is for me mystery, and I'm a lawyer by training, and I did a bit of research. Why countries decided in 1961, at really the hottest period of the Cold War, to outlaw the spying, because all of them were spying, and basically they created this norm which put quite a few states into some sort of potentially illegal behavior. And it is still mystery for me. I couldn't find in travel preparatoire for the conference why it happened. Therefore, if there are lawyers among you, please think about that, and we may engage in discussion on the historical reasons why it happened. The second article of Vienna Convention, which is important for Internet era, Snowden revelation, is that diplomatic missions, embassies, permanent missions, may employ all appropriate means of communication that should include the use of the Internet. This is what I add. Therefore, email and Internet communication is protected by Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, exactly because of this Article 27. Next article, which is important for us, is 24. The archives and documents of the mission shall be inviolable at any time and wherever they may be. This is a very powerful formulation. It means the diplomatic documents, e-documents, email are inviolable at any time and wherever they may be. Well, one can strongly argue that it includes, for example, Google servers, Yahoo servers, Dropbox, Gmail, and that this article will require a lot of interpretation and interesting discussion about the limits of diplomatic immunities in the Internet era. But this is the current formulation applicable to the Internet. Article 40C is also extremely interesting. It says that third states shall accord to official correspondence and other official communication in transit, they were not receiving state, including in code or cipher, the same freedom and protection as it is accorded by the receiving state. What does it practically mean? It means if you are Italian diplomats posted in Tehran and you send email back to Rome, to Farnesina, your communication email, which probably will travel from Tehran to Emirates maybe, then via cable through Egypt, Italy. Now these Internet are different, but all countries which will carry your message from Tehran to Rome should observe the same level or should provide the same level of protection as the receiving state, in this case Iran. This is important to keep in mind because it increases the need for the protection of diplomatic communication. Obviously, when it was drafted, it related mainly to diplomatic couriers and traditional way of sending information by diplomats. Now, we just made a survey of the regulation of the Vienna Convention on information gathering, on protection on archives, and protection of communication by third states. There are other articles which are also strengthening the protection of communication, and it is not surprising that Vienna Convention provided such a high level of protection of communication and information for diplomats. Communication information are the basis of diplomatic profession, and without securing that, one cannot secure diplomatic function, important diplomatic function. And one of the philosophies, the underlying concept behind which guided drafters of the Vienna Convention, is that it is of interest of the international community that diplomatic communication is protected, because through discrete diplomatic communication between diplomat and capitals, one can develop stronger international agreements and deals. If it is not discrete, if other sides can follow consultation of what's going on, the quality of the deals that were reached will be less strong and less beautiful. It's interesting philosophy behind the reasoning why diplomats get such a high level of protection. Now, one can ask, and this is the underlying question, like the question of trees, the second question is, how can we apply the Vienna Convention on diplomatic relations in the internet era? What is realistic and responsible? Should we ask Google, for example, to protect immunities of our documents saved on Google? What about Gmail? What is the border zone? Can we ask internet service providers in Rome, for example, diplomats posted in Rome, can they request from Telecom Italia that they ensure that nobody can interrupt or interfere with their communication? What is proportional and realistic in this context? This is the main dilemma, and I would like with that to close my presentation and to invite you to comment both on the information gathering on the example of the Iran negotiation, and to comment also on the question of international legal rules for the information gathering by diplomats. The floor is yours. Let me see. Now you can ask the questions by typing the question in the chat window. This is for those of you who are new to our webinars. This is modus operandi. You can ask the question. I have monopoly of the microphone in this case. You see, even in the internet era, you can enforce monopolies. Well, it seems that either I explained it very well or you're shy. Let me see what Livio is asking us. How can clandestine information be disregarded as illegal? If sometimes it can save your life and threats to your embassy. Okay, there are two questions, Livio. One is the functionality of gathering clandestine information, and as you indicated, there is an important national security aspect, and it's basically the main argument of the U.S. government and NSA in justifying their overall surveillance. This is the function of the information. On the other side, there is a question of legality. And as you can see, the function is not always in sync with legality. And this is, as I mentioned, also my dilemma why countries decided to make illegal clandestine operation. Therefore, it is illegal, but it could be, as you indicated, useful for protection of the country, for national security. But according to Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, it is illegal operation. And if you carefully follow the reaction of the US officials to the Snowden revelation, you can notice that they haven't apologized so far. They expressed regret, but they haven't apologized. If they apologize officially, they will accept that those revelations are correct, and that could be basis for potential international legal action, at least when it comes to the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Therefore, there is a bit of a strange dynamic and contradiction when it comes to these 2 points. Alan Franklin, who woke up early in the morning, he's based in Vancouver. Alan's question is, if the Vienna Convention is seen as being so powerful, it seems strange that it now appears that it has been breached from the outset on a regular basis. Why do diplomats continue to refer to it as being so abided by when it is clearly not? Well, quite a loaded comment with quite a few questions. Vienna Convention is powerful. It's one of the strongest legal documents. That's the first point. Has it been breached? Yes, and I think it has been breached through the practice. Is it strange? It is strange, especially that it was adopted relatively recently, 1961. It is not that the country started spying after 1961. Spying is one of the oldest professions that it started very early. So it is still mystery why they outlawed the IT security. And why diplomats? Well, that's a sort of a double talk that exists in diplomacy, and that's true that the talk is not in line with the practice. Pietro, to what extent do you think that our communication mainly means are monitored? Voila. Oh, Pietro. Pietro is in Belgrade, or he learned whatever, Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, Montenegrin. Pietro, as a principle, I would say that our communication is monitored if it is a public communication. If it uses the internet, there is a possibility to monitor that communication. Now, what we heard from Snowden is that this possibility is very often used, and that's especially by this data hoovering techniques of processing basically all internet traffic which is going between UK and the United States. It was one of the main temporary operations by British Secret Service. Therefore, that's sort of a presumption. And once Secretary General of the ITU was asked about his habit in sending emails, and he provided really interesting answer. He said that whatever he writes as if he was writing to the public, to media or to newspaper. Therefore, he takes the presumption that his mail is monitored and it can be published. Erlan agrees with me that everything is monitored. I would say that a lot is monitored and potentially everything is monitored. I think that there are things which are simply bypassing all of those big hoovers, data hoovers. Paulo, do you deem appropriate a new international treaty updating the provisions of the Vienna Convention? I am afraid that interpretation of the existing articles might not be enough. Paulo, excellent question. Now, yes and no. Let me give the arguments for yes. There are some articles, especially articles that I quoted, are really it's almost impossible to apply them there. They were drafted for some different era, for printed communication, slow exchange, and that's not anymore suitable for our time. Therefore, one can argue that it can be amendment can be provided through possible protocol to the Vienna Convention, because it has already optional protocols. maybe the third protocol. There are two optional protocols. The third protocol could be on the digital aspect. I would say that would be probably the easiest way to settle this issue. Now, if you ask me if it is realistic, this is the second part of my answer. I say it's not. As you know, nowadays it's very difficult to draft the new international treaty, and I would be very careful with the Vienna Convention, because it is a good piece of law. It is followed, and we probably should avoid opening diplomatic Pandora box. Therefore, if we start with redrafting, countries will come with different requirements. And most likely the practice, possible customary law, will amend or will complement the Vienna Convention, and maybe some court cases that we can expect over the next 3 to 4 years around this question of Vienna Convention. Is it possible any longer to distinguish diplomatic communication from other communication? It is not, and historically there is an interesting role of Italy. Italy and France, during the negotiation of the Vienna Convention on diplomatic relations, wanted to put a clause in Vienna Convention that when documents are outside of diplomatic mission, in order to be protected, they should be labeled as diplomatic documents. You should have some sort of hint that it is diplomatic document. That amendment was refused. Therefore, according to the current formulation, even if document is not labeled as diplomatic document, it enjoys diplomatic protection. Now, practically speaking, it is very difficult to distinguish. What is the email sent by there is a mission opposite of our office? How can one argue that mail sent by a diplomat in this mission to his colleague in some other country via Gmail is a diplomatic email? And this is the question of practicality, how to identify this diplomatic email. Airline technology allow one-on-one conversation to be monitored. You mean technology generally one-on-one in person or one-on-one on Skype? Could you just be more specific? Luca, how can we be sure that any updating of the Vienna Convention can be easily overtaken by new technological development in the future? Luca, it is a good point. And so far, Vienna Convention was robust enough. It has managed to. It is applicable. My telephone is ringing, and could you just excuse me for 1 minute? Hello? Hello? I'm sorry, I'm back. I don't know how to switch off my telephone. Luca, that's the key. How robust? And I think the main question, main dilemma, and you have it in all international conventions. The more specific you become, the less flexible the text is. Therefore, if you specify use the specific tools, as for example, the Vienna Convention did with wireless radio communication, that parts could become obsolete with technological development. But Vienna Convention, I would say, was good piece of law. It was drafted with very carefully balanced between principles, why diplomatic immunity should be granted, or functional necessity, and practical considerations. But it's an essential question. Alessandra, I agree, drafting a new international treaty would be quite difficult. I'm afraid that amending the Vienna Convention would be quite difficult too. How would you suggest approach an update of the convention? Well, Alessandra, that's one possibility is protocol, and I completely share your view that it is a risky terrain. It could be very risky terrain. What one can expect is development of so-called instant customary law, developing something which will become instant customary law. For example, that states cannot now go to Google and ask why my diplomatic documents are not protected, as they can expect because of the literal interpretation of the Vienna Convention. Therefore, one can expect that customary law will be developed that states can ask for the protection if they label their documents and their email as diplomatic documents, if there is some sort of appropriate ways of indicating the nature of the document, what France and Italy wanted even during the drafting of Vienna Convention. Therefore, I can expect that instant customary law development. In person, Ellen, that's true. Apparently, mobile telephones could be used, and but I really don't know these techniques, and we cannot discuss them. The currently focus is now on the online communication. Matteo, I write on behalf of a group of junior Italian diplomats, and I thank you for the kind attention. Thank you for attending, Matteo and your group. I would like to know your opinion about the fact that most servers are located on the US soil. Does it affect security of classified information? Excellent question, Alan. Sorry, Matteo. And you're referring essentially to the cloud computing. I would say that 80 or 90% of cloud data are stored on servers in the United States. The only country which intentionally didn't allow development of the US-centered cloud computing is China. And China, as you know, it has its own Twitter, Weibo, it has its own Facebook, and all social media tools. Therefore, they keep their data in China on servers in China. Now, there are arguments that initially restricting the Google, Facebook, and other access was a matter of censorship or restricting the access to information. But currently, the fact is that China is out of this cloud computing, otherwise global cloud computing. Does it affect the protection of the confidential information? Yes, it affects. And now many international organizations based in Geneva who moved big time to cloud computing over the last 2 or 3 years are now revisiting this approach because they are now concerned. They were inspired to have a cloud computing tools because of the financial aspect. It's much cheaper to have the computers in the cloud than the maintaining servers at your premises. Now they're reconsidering that, and they're also reconsidering possibility to force main companies, mainly Amazon, Google, to observe diplomatic immunities. Now here we have 2 aspects. One is technical possibility of spying, that when the data is on the server, that's probably quite easy. And secondly is the legal aspect. Therefore, if there is a surveillance, in spite of the accepted legal protection of documents, this is different. Therefore, there will be a breach of the law. Currently, there are no such explicit regulations except Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Matteo, please consult with your friends and tell me if the answer is satisfying for your group. How many of you are there, Matteo? Alan Franklin, do you think that if France, for example, initiates a claim against US at the International Court of Justice under the optional protocol, there will be any change in practice? Well, as we know, there is always discrepancy between law and practice. The murder, killing is prohibited, but it is happening. And people are still killed, and jails are quite full with the people, with the murderers all over the world. Therefore, the fact that law exists doesn't mean that prohibited behavior won't be happening in real life. Now, in your Alan, in your case, if there is a case which is hypothetical, I don't think that the practice will be stopped, but it would be illegal, and we have to see what are the implementation mechanisms. I expect, because of the privacy pressure, the technology will provide some more robust tool to guard the guardians. There were some sort of check and balances like in politics, where we will be at least aware that something strange is going with our data. some technological development along these lines could be expected. Alessandra, I can see that Alessandra is a lawyer. Instant customary law sounds like an interesting solution. I will read more about this option. Thank you for your answer. Thank you for your good question. Matteo, well, it seems that your group is happy with my answer to the question on cloud computing. If we don't have any other questions, seems to be quiet. Let me just sum up our discussion in today's webinar. We started with information gathering on the example of the Iran nuclear negotiations and use of Twitter, and we had the key question: how to distinguish important from signaling and from general buzz tweets. I would say 95% are to some extent useless tweets, but you have still to look for, especially for diplomatic signaling tweets, which are extremely important. Now, then we move to the question of the evaluation information, curating information, and hinted to the question of the bias. As you can see, I didn't have to introduce you to how to use the Facebook, Twitter. You know it, and general information. Now, this is sort of more or less accepted knowledge all over the world. Well, I'm sometimes surprised with the lack of that knowledge, but I think in this group it is. But what I highlighted is the question of bias. Bias when you are trying to find information. Then we move to the Snowden, impact of the Snowden information gathering, and went through the 3 important articles of the Vienna Convention. The first article, Article 3 of Vienna Convention, specifying that clandestine operations are illegal. Then Article 27 indicated that mission can use all appropriate means for communication, including email. This article opens the space for the email. And Article 24 indicated that diplomatic documents, including e-documents, are protected wherever they are and at any time. If we extend it, it is even if they are not on the planet Earth, they are legally protected. In our discussion, we had very interesting comments about the need for the amendment of the Vienna Convention, and also the question of applicability, this dichotomy between law and practice, which always exists. And now there is a huge gap between what Vienna Convention is specifying and what is reality. That gap has to be filled by having some sort of functional amendment of Vienna Convention to the needs of the Internet era. It is not very likely that the Vienna Convention can be amended, not necessarily because of the topic itself, but because of the reluctance of countries to open negotiation on such a solid piece of international law as the convention is. And then we mentioned instant customary law as one of the possible ways to fill this gap. Now we have a comment from Alan. Most commentators say that International Court of Justice decisions are almost always followed. So perhaps the decision of the International Court of Justice declaring such practice illegal would become complied with the United States. Do you think that it is possible? Thank you, Alan, for pointing to this. I know that today there is some sort of skepticism about the moves of the United States, especially after the Snowden revelation. But one has to accept, especially international law, that the United States, whenever it is possible, try to fit their action in the international rules. Sometimes the interpretation of the international rule is very flexible and general, but there is always intention to be within the legal limits. You know that in military action, usually and near every commander deciding to about the target, there is a lawyer, military lawyer or humanitarian law lawyer, basically arms conflict lawyer. But there is a general spirit which should be acknowledged to try to be within the framework of international. Now, I don't need to be cynical. There are many examples where, especially recently, where the practice, in this case of the United States, went out of the I would say, acceptable interpretation of international law. Therefore, that's good news is this general culture of observing the law in the United States, and bad news is examples of the practice that doesn't follow this approach. But I would say that especially over the last few months with the developments with Syria and Iran, we have more and more signs of the increasing need to use diplomacy and international law by the United States and generally Western countries. Okay, remembering one of your first slides and hearing what you say about signaling, can you comment on the way effusively Kerry gave astronaut at the end of the Iran talks? Okay. That's, well, you know, one has really to be practical, and diplomats are human, politicians are human, and after spending so many hours in the conference room, after being under such stress, after realizing the importance of that moment, yeah, they knew that they were in front of the camera, but they do not follow, they do not control always their physical gestures. It's important, especially in such tense circumstances. And probably we shouldn't go too far in seeing everything as a diplomatic signal. That one has to be realistic and contextual. And then I think that in this case, in your example, it was just a human gesture, you know, some sort of relief after this long negotiation. But it doesn't mean that, for example, especially Twitter and corridor diplomacy are not used for sending diplomatic signals. But one has to see it in the context. Okay, we have I think exhausted all questions and comments. Thank you for your yeah. Dee says thank you. I've been wondering ever since I watched it. That's the thing. Body language, like in the normal day-to-day behavior, can tell a lot, but on the other side, we shouldn't overestimate its importance and relevance. Thank you. We will send you a summary of the webinar, and I'm looking forward to our continuous exchange on quite a few interesting issues that have been triggered. For example, Alessandra's discussion on instant customary law could be extremely interesting. Matteo and his group comments on cloud computing and the status of cloud computing. Stay with us. Follow emails and exchanges that we will have with as part of the cooperation between Institute Diplomatic and Diplo, and provide your comments and suggestions. Many thanks, and bye for now.